Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 131 of Small Business War Stories. In today's episode, I had a chance to sit down with Dave Miller. And Dave is a small business expert, and the conversation I had with him is kind of like sitting down with Coach. You know, he's helped a lot of people, so he was successful with his own business, and he talks about that. But he has also coached people for decades about how to make their small business better. So if you're interested in getting better, which you are, which is why you're listening to this, and learning about small business and a lot of little tidbits and things that will make you better, this is a great episode for you. And this episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Gusto. That's Gusto.com. And Gusto is a system that helps you deal with things like payroll and benefits that are frankly a pain in the ass to deal with. And nobody ever starts their business to deal with that. So especially as you start getting a few employees and you start growing, it would be helpful if you went to Gusto. That's Gusto.com/war stories. And then you can sign up there. And when you run your first payroll, they'll give you 3 free months. And you win, they win, this podcast wins, everybody wins. So without further ado, let's go to Northern Indiana and listen to the conversation that I had with Dave Miller. And we are live here in beautiful Plymouth, Indiana. And today I have the pleasure and honor to sit down with David Miller, who is a small business expert and consultant here in Northern Indiana. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And you have a very broad swath of experience with small businesses, so I'm really interested to learn from you. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is the fact that you, at some point, I don't know exactly how long ago, had a radio show, where you interviewed small businesses.
That's right.
Pre-podcast.
Yes, that's right. We were doing community radio.
Okay.
In Bloomington, Indiana, and I worked with, at the time, the business editor of the local newspaper, and the two of us did a show called Business on the Line, and we would bring in a guest, but then we'd have special features of the show, like Music Downbeat, which would be some song that had some business connection, and What's the Deal, which was...
So you had different segments?
Different segments, and what's going on in town. People would call in. It was a call-in show as well, and people would call in and say, hey, I saw this building going up there. What's the deal with that? So that was the What's the Deal segment. So we tried to break it up as an hour show weekly, and it was a lot of fun.
Wow. This is, between half an hour and an hour show weekly as well. I should have more segments, I guess. I should think.
Well, they seem to work for us,
yeah,
and people kind of enjoyed them, and but it really depends on what your audience is into.
Yeah, what's the wackiest story that came up during your time on the show?
Boy, it's been a while since we did it.
Yeah.
So
when was this, in the 90s?
This would have been in the early 90s.
Early 90s.
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
Awesome. So
nothing particularly comes to mind other than technical difficulties.
Really? Yeah, I've had a couple of those happen.
Yeah.
My favorite was, Mick, if you listen to this episode, we recorded an entire episode where the memory card ran out. So we only had 10 minutes out of 60.
Yeah.
That's
a lot of fill.
That was a great one.
Yeah.
So help me understand a little bit better about so you have a broad, so you're involved in some real estate projects, but you're also involved in coaching small businesses, right. And you're also writing a book currently.
Yeah, my background, I've always felt that it's one thing I do builds on the next thing I get involved with.
Yeah.
And, early on, I, went through college, and my first job out of college was in marketing with Procter & Gamble. And that gave me a taste of the corporate side of how things were being done. And I did that for a few years and just really decided that, I'm not really a corporate kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And I ended up going into an employment agency to answer an ad for a marketing position, and it turned out that it was with Procter & Gamble. And I thought, well, this isn't going to work out. I'm already with them. And so the employment agency guy said, hey, have you ever thought about owning your own business? And I had always been entrepreneurial growing up with little projects and things like that. So I said, well, tell me more. And so I got involved and bought a franchise for an employment agency. My wife Barbara and I moved to Arizona to open that, and so the big three all at once. New job, new wife, new location,
and new kid too, right?
Well, that came once we were out in Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we did that, and the family kind of brought us back to the Midwest. And I ended up going to work for Indiana University as a job developer.
So how long did you run that franchise for?
A couple of years, and at the time then I also started a resume writing business out there, because I had, at the time, I think 10,000 people a month were moving into Arizona looking for jobs. And they'd come into our employment agency and they wouldn't have an up-to-date resume, and we'd end up kind of doing it for them just so we could send their information out to our employers. And then it's like, hey, wait a minute, let's see if we can monetize this. And it just took off and actually became a bigger business than the employment agency business. And when we then decided to come back to the Midwest, we were able to sell off our job opportunity box to a number of different other agencies because we had developed all these relationships. Yeah. And then we sold the resume service to a guy who then built it from there. So we came back, and I went to work for Indiana University and as a job developer for their internship and co-op program. And that was traveling around the country, talking to really big corporate America again, because I had the experience.
You just can't escape it.
Yeah, exactly. And so did that for a number of years. And so at that point, I had done the corporate thing. I had done my own entrepreneurial thing, and I'd worked for a university, that sector, and decided to get back into small business related stuff. And that's when I got into the advising side of things, and did that work for 16 years. And during that 16 years, I worked with thousands of small businesses.
So you've seen a lot. So our audience that is either running a small business or thinking about running a small business, you have quite a bit to share, and I have some ideas and some questions.
Sure,
things that
absolutely.
we can go into there. So you're developing a number of concepts to discuss in a book that you're writing,
right?
And tell me a little bit more about. So you have this framework of the 3 M's of small business success.
Yeah, 3 M's. It kind of builds on what I saw over the 16 years of working with both businesses that were very successful and businesses that failed. And the 3 M's really came down to money, management, and market. And I saw these concepts contribute heavily to either the success or the failure of the business I was working with. And what happens when people hear those 3 things, aside from the fact that they all start with M, there's something missing. And what's missing from that list is product. And so a lot of people...
And people.
And people, but I'll group people into management.
Yeah.
But what I saw was that the strength of a business's product or service didn't always dictate their success.
That is so interesting.
The greatest product, I saw people with what I thought was the greatest product would fail because they couldn't manage the 3 M's around the product. And then I saw people that I thought their product or service was mediocre, and they were wildly successful. Now, they wouldn't be long-term wildly successful because there's only so many dissatisfied customers that you can go through before you run out of customers.
Sure.
So, the whole side, money, it's do you have enough to start the business and operate during the leaner years and then move forward? Management is all those management functions like people and everything around the business.
Yeah.
And market, is there one? Do you know how to reach them on all those concepts? So while those 3 words are singular words, there are many things around it. And there's been other folks that, if you watch The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis, he says product, people, and process. And he's wildly successful. And so, you can group them a little bit differently.
And what's the money side there? Does the money side have to do with your own cash flow management, or does it have to do with getting investors, with knowing when you should get investors or not? What does that mean?
Absolutely, all those things. Because when somebody's looking to start a business, what they really need to concentrate on is that front end money to get started. And I saw way too many people get their businesses started. They had enough money to start, and the market didn't catch on as fast as they thought it would. And just when they're starting to catch on, they run out of money. And
that's the worst time to raise money.
Absolutely. Because the best time to raise money is when you don't necessarily need it as much, and it takes some of that pressure off. So I saw so many people, it was like, they put all their money in the middle of the floor and set it on fire. It was the same outcome. They could have done that and had the same outcome. So the whole money side, whether it's raising the money early, and boy, I'll tell you today, I think it's a lot easier to raise money than it was when I first started. I mean, I ended up starting private investor networks in the communities that I dealt with, of just local angel type investors, more so than big money. But I also worked with companies that would have to put together a memorandum of investment, do deal sheets, those types of things. But it's just easier. And the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, both at the federal level and at the state levels, has eased up, probably 10 to 15 years ago, eased up on the investor side of raising money.
Right, so like who's a qualified investor?
Exactly, you had to have that. And in a small town, there might be somebody who wanted to invest in a business, but if they weren't a qualified investor,
which is always this bizarre benchmark. It's like an $200,000 and $1 million net worth, or something, or $1 million net worth,
something like that.
I remember that. That was 20 years ago. I took the Series 7 broker license. That was on there. I didn't last very long on that job. So let's talk a little bit about. You talk about the definition of luck.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that. And you know what the interesting thing is about all these concepts is, for better or for worse, and this is kind of what makes it fun and what makes it terrible at the same time. It's like I learned so many concepts about business when I went to grad school, but really for me at least, a great majority of them didn't sink in until I got hit with them square in the face, like a 2x4, like actually running a business for 10 years. Right. So it's interesting to, these principles all apply and everything like that. But
until you hit it.
Yeah. Humans, we're funny little creatures where we basically don't tend to learn.
Well, the whole idea, and again, it was a Roman philosopher, Seneca, who is attributed with the saying that the definition of luck is preparation meeting opportunity. And what I saw, again, in working with these thousands of businesses along the way, especially at the startup stage, and we used to run startup sessions for people just thinking about going into business. And we'd get a group of people in a room, and they just, I got the idea, and I'm just thinking about it, and I want to move forward. And what I saw was these folks, we'd kind of, my attitude in working with any small business, I found out very early on that I could not tell them, nor did I want to tell them, that their business would succeed or fail. I would lead them down the path through their own research to realize whether it would succeed or fail on their own. Because, you get passionate about your idea, you're passionate about your business, and if somebody gives you some advice or some comments that you don't like, you have a tendency to, well, that's their idea. I know I'm on the right track.
Yep. So
what I saw was that folks would, if they would go down that path and realize that, okay, this isn't going to work, the self-realization that it wasn't going to work, they'd get discouraged. And what we would talk about is, like, I could say, look, this definition of luck, people will say, oh, he was real lucky and he got that going and all that. And I said, oh, the definition of luck is preparation meeting opportunity. You have these two lines that are on a graph that are going, and they meet each other. And so what will happen many times is people find out when they're wanting to start their business is that this opportunity has come by them, but they're not prepared. Why aren't they prepared? Well, maybe they don't have enough money saved up, or they haven't raised the money they needed. Or maybe they don't have the skills yet to start this business they need to work on. Or maybe there are other things, product development, that they really need to work on. And they would get discouraged, and I'd say, look, when you think about it, opportunities are always coming by. Always. You think about it. How many ideas do you have during the day?
Yeah.
I mean, opportunity is there, and that's, they talk about the U.S. being the land of opportunity. So the whole concept then is, okay, how do I get myself ready or prepared to seize the next opportunity and be lucky?
Because the question is not whether the opportunity is going to come, it's when.
Exactly. And what's held you back on this opportunity? Was it that you didn't have your money in order? Was it that you hadn't saved up enough, or you hadn't lined up investors, or you hadn't gone down that path, or maybe you're weak in some areas of running a business, and you need to work on it.
And going along with that, choosing the right market is a big deal for that. And one of my professors in business school, Andy Ratcliffe, was a big proponent of this, where he talks about market matters way more than people think, and that when a great market meets like a so-so team, market wins. And if you have a great team addressing a market that's not the right market, then the markets also win. Like also wins,
Right.
meaning like you don't win.
Right.
I found this out the hard way through some of my business experience. But what are some of the things when people are choosing their market and what they want to do? Because just because I love, if I live in Florida and I love to knit sweaters, just because I love knitting sweaters and I think that's my life's calling doesn't mean that my sweater business in Florida is going to succeed.
That's right.
Because the market for, AC is pretty hardcore in Florida, so maybe indoor sweaters, but you know what I mean?
Sure.
So what are some of the things you think about when you choose that market and kind of go through that?
Well, and it's the point that you say the market wins, and it does, and it can win even though you may not be ready for it to win.
Yeah.
I worked with people going both directions. I would drive to one of the areas probably 30 miles away from where I was doing some advising, and every time I'd drive that route heading over to that office to work out of that office, I'd pass this business that made wood products in the shape of animals. And I'd drive by and there'd be all these animals out in the yard.
Yeah.
And I'd drive by and the next time there'd be more animals. And the next time there'd be more animals.
Yeah.
And so this business owner
Makes you wonder what the wood animals are doing at night.
You're right, because sometimes, no. And so this person, they were very good at making wood animals. They were not good at selling wood animals, nor did the market particularly want wood animals. And so they, naturally, they pretty soon the wood animals went back to the earth because they just sat there and nothing happened to them. On the other side, where the market is craving what you're after, I worked with a guy who was at the front end of the video rental business. Now, obviously, we're at the tail end of the video rental business. But he was, and he had skills. He had been in larger corporate retail. But his business just took off. And the cash flow, I mean, you think about a rental business where it's, a lot of volume of rental and all that. And so his market was there and really wanted him, and he had a hard time keeping up with the market. He expanded stores, number of stores. He went regionally, and the problem there, and it didn't turn out to be a real problem for him, but what I saw in other businesses was great cash flow covers up problems.
Yeah.
If you're not worried about money because it's coming in so well, you may have problems that you don't see or address. We'll worry about it later. And that'll take most businesses down if they don't see those things and take care of them.
You mean the invisible problems that get covered up?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they don't have, most small businesses have the cash flow problem.
Yeah.
That's the real problem for them, is it's not coming in fast enough, the market's not catching on, or they've not done a good job of capturing the market themselves.
Yeah.
So,
what about the psychology and the mental health side of starting a business? Because I think that's something that people don't talk about a lot. It's something that I think, in my experience, is very real. It's a very, very lonely job. There's a lot of pressure that I guess both society, when you plant a flag saying you're going to start something, implicitly puts on you, but mostly that you put on yourself for saying, like, this is what I've chosen to do, so I better be good at it, or else people will think I'm no good. And you combine that with the fact that most people, in my experience, who have the desire or wherewithal to go out on their own, in some ways, it's because of the what you were talking about earlier. Like they don't feel like they belong in in a corporation or in some other type of job, right? So how do you put that all together? What are some of the things that you've seen with this, and what are some of the lessons that you've seen on that front?
Yeah, it's interesting. On my one of my tables where I'd sit down with folks, I had two things. One was a box of Kleenex, and one was a small crystal ball. And many times we'd have to go to the Kleenex because it would get very emotional, and it would. Folks would, just really break down. I've been working on this business. It just hasn't done what I wanted. I'm so deep into it now. I've spent so much money. And it's like, okay, we're reaching a skill set that I don't really have, and that's as a psychologist to really help you through these things. And so in my toolbox of folks that I leaned on to help my clients, I had psychologists that I would refer them to because like you say, it can be a very lonely business. We'd also, at the front end of any startup that we would deal with, a part of the early investigation, so to speak, was to get them to realize that the people around them were also going to be involved in their business.
Right, like their families.
Their family, friends, or whatever. And to bring them in early and tell them what they're up to, especially family. When you leave and you go somewhere and you're gone for 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and then you come back and everybody's either in bed or whatever, that's a tough thing for a family. And so we'd want to make sure that anybody that was getting ready to go into a business realized that, hey, look, you can't be the island here. You have got to involve your family. They have to know what you're up to. And we would even encourage them in drafting their business plan to make sure their family read it, to see, okay, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Because that whole business planning thing, it's not just the roadmap, it's also the story that you're telling, and your friends and your family need to know that story so that when you have to be absent, they know what you're doing. You're not just off, doing something they don't understand.
And we interrupt the conversation for 1 second here with Dave to talk about our sponsor, Gusto. And Gusto is a sponsor of the show. They are a supporter of small businesses, and they work with small businesses to help them with things like payroll and benefits, keeping track of the things that are, for legal reasons and regulatory reasons, important. And also your employees want to get paid. So that's, important, but kind of a pain to deal with. So I know in my 10 years running a business, I, as soon as I could, hired somebody to help me with payroll, and Gusto can do that for you. Go to gusto.com/awar-stories. So it's gusto.com. And when you sign up there, you will get 3 free months when you run your first payroll. So go check it out. And let's get back to the episode now with Dave Miller. What do you think is it, like, you bring up business plans.
Yeah.
What do you think is the importance of business plans in today's day and age? I mean, there's an entire school of thought that business plans are obsolete because, and one of the great quotes I've heard is like, a business plan is the one thing that's absolutely guaranteed not to happen. However, there's also a school of thought that the process of putting together a business plan and thinking through those things can help you uncover things that are really important to your business.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge is that time's money, and you're trying to reach a market, you're trying to do things. Business plans can take a long time, and then people can get into what I like to call fake work, which is before you even have anything real going on, you're deciding about the colors of your logo, which is like, BS. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've always seen the business planning as a process and not a document. However, there can be a document that comes out of the process. And to me, the process of thinking about your business and coming up with some of the more concrete ideas about that business, getting out of your head, getting something down electronically or on paper, I think is very important. And as we all know, and especially in today's GPS world, I could get from Plymouth, Indiana to Anchorage, Alaska without a map. I could get there without my GPS, but it would take me longer. I might go out of my way, and I would spend far more money than if I plan out my route the best I can, that I think, and then I try to execute that plan.
Yeah.
And so I see the business planning process as the same thing. You have all these ideas in your head, and getting them, we can remember aim for from 5 to 7 things at a time, and so business goes way beyond that number of things. So we would always, and still do, encourage people to put together some type of a draft document that it just gets the things out of their head, because then what happens is people see that and they make other connections and they make other decisions based on those things. Now, what we also would tell people and still do is, okay, look, you're going to finish this draft, and I will continue to call it a draft. It is never a finished document. It is not something you wave and say, I'm done, and it goes in the desk drawer, because tomorrow it changes. And so we would tell folks, look, this is your starting point. The market is going to present itself to you. It's going to tell you something different. It's much like my resume business out in Arizona. I started with a franchise of an employment agency that had everything laid out. Here's how you implement. It was really, franchises are all about execution. They're supposed to be well thought out, and you then are supposed to take them and run with it. But the market presents itself to you in many ways, and it may or may not work. And when we were in the employment agency business, the market said, hey, we need this other service, resumes. And so it's like, the military. The military runs multiple lines of offense, and wherever they then run into whatever they're dealing with, they change resources to that. And the market is the same way in business. You don't necessarily, they talk about the shotgun approach to marketing versus rifle. You put a big blast out, hit as many as you can, and hopefully some are going to be your customers, or you figure out exactly who your customer is and you hit them with the rifle shot right there. And I worked with one of the greatest entrepreneurs I ever worked with was a guy named Bill Cook. And Bill Cook started a medical device company in his apartment in Bloomington, Indiana. And he built it into Cook Medical, which became a multi-billion-dollar company. And I got to know him, and he would come and he would present to some of my business classes and those types. A very giving man on giving back. And his slogan was ready, fire, aim. Not ready, aim, fire. Ready, fire, aim. And his idea was, okay, do everything you can to be ready for the market, to run your business, to get it out there. Put it out there, and then be ready to aim. Be ready to respond to the way the market is responding to you. Maybe you're doing it this way, and the market says, well, we'd really like it this way. Well, you better aim it in on there. Now, that's the challenge. But the flip side of that is I've run into way too many entrepreneurs as well, that it's almost like the old company IT&T. IT&T became known as international this and that. They got into everything, and they had no focus, and they couldn't control what they were doing.
So it's kind of like a Goldilocks, like too little, too much, just right. So there has to be, you have to be broad enough, but then be able to focus.
That's right. Exactly.
That brings to mind another thing that where I think this might apply, which is like the whole idea of work ethic. So there's like the school of thought that if you're starting your own business, it's going to be a grind. It's going to be 16-hour days every day. And, sleep is for the weak. And then there's the idea of, again, if you're in this for the long haul, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You need to get your sleep. You need to work out. You need to do nutrition right and take care of your mental health, because that's the number one thing. How do you look at that, and what are some of the patterns that you've seen with this attitude toward your business?
Well, I agree with you. You have to take care of yourself. It is a marathon, and too many people do run out of steam right when they shouldn't be running out of steam.
Right.
And so we go back to the planning process. To me, a part of the planning process is to know how long this marathon is. And it reveals itself through your process when you get out there and you start doing the planning around all the functional areas of business. We're talking about in the many hats in business. And if you think about it, you can do an organizational chart with you as the owner, president of your own company, whatever title you want to have.
Yeah.
And then you have all these functional areas underneath you: marketing, finance, management, personnel, all these areas. And it's funny, in small business, you got to wear all the hats.
Right.
You're going to be the janitor. You're going to be the gopher. You're going to be all these things. And if you aren't ready for that,
Yeah, you can't be above it either.
Exactly right. And we used to, folks come in. Most people start their business with the idea for the product or service.
Yeah.
Everybody comes to business really in that way. Either they're working for somebody else and they see that the market's not being met in some way, or they've had a hobby that they've enjoyed and now they want to try to make it into a business.
Yep.
And so they don't come in. And so one of the first things in the business planning process that we would have people do is really a skill assessment. What are you good at? What aren't you good at? Here's all the functional areas of business. Are you good at finance and accounting? Are you good at managing people? Are you good at product development? Are you good at marketing? Are you good at sales? What do you do? We'd have them rank basically from 1 to 7. And most people would come in at what they're best at is product development and maybe marketing. Very few would raise their hands and say, I'm really good at finance. I'm really good at cash flow management, those types of things.
Yeah.
And the lesson then is, okay, now you've rated these things. You don't have to spend a lot of time developing your 1s, 2s, and 3s. But those 4 through 7, those functional areas don't go away just because you don't like to do them. You have to decide to either educate yourself in those areas or plan on hiring those areas out. Because, again, this goes back to the mental health issue. It goes back to the stamina issue. You got to do it all. You wear all the hats. And so, again, as the front end of the planning process, if you know that's coming, it's less stressful. Okay, I'm going to have somebody do my bookkeeping for me.
Yep.
Or, hey, I'm not good at marketing. I'm good at making stuff. I got to get somebody to do my marketing.
Yeah.
Rather than last minute have to deal with it. So, again, to me, it's part of that process at the front end to really make it so that it makes it easier for you moving forward.
In your experience, having encountered so many different businesses, what are some, when you first meet somebody, like whether or not you tell them, some of the telltale signs of like this person's going to make it or this person's unlikely to make it?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Because people surprise you all the time, I'm sure. But.
Absolutely. And my style was always, okay, let's just talk about your business. Tell me what you're up to. Tell me about you and your background and why you're doing this and how this is moving forward. And through that, I could often really kind of see, okay, well, I think, they've got a grasp on reality here. And reality is they know it's going to be hard work. They know they've got some failings. They know they have some areas that they really are good at. And the ones that I would consider in denial of their weaknesses are the ones that I knew, well, this is going to be a challenge for these people.
So ultimately, it's about self-knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the more you're able to be introspective about it.
Introspective, and going back to that skill assessment of what you feel like you are really good at, and recognizing that, no, this is part. When I started as a business counselor, I was marketing heavy. That's what my background was. And so when I counsel and advise people, when we were in that section of the business, I felt like I could really do well. And I really realized early on that what was oftentimes going to dictate the success of this company was that money side or the finance side. And, I got a C in accounting when I was in college in both the classes. And I didn't really like that. And that's, I guess, why I went the marketing route more than anything. But as a business counselor, I found out, this business, you have got to be able to keep track of your numbers. And I talk about something called the scorecard of business, which we can talk about in a little bit if you want to. But it was, okay, you have really got to know what's going on numbers wise with your business to manage it well.
And it seems intimidating, but it actually, like, once you learn it, it's not that complicated. It's not, it doesn't mean that you have to know how to put together a financial statement with debits and credits. It just means that you have to know how to read one,
exactly.
like what your revenues are, what your gross profit is, and net income, EBITDA, things like that.
Yeah, and even at the super small business level, what I'd put out there was we called the scorecards of business. And much like you would never go to a sporting event if, one, they didn't keep score, or two, you didn't know how the score was kept.
Yeah.
And so to me, the scorecards in business are the cash flow projection, the income statement, and the balance sheet. Yeah. And those three statements tell you everything in a different way about your business. The cash flow tells you how you're going to operate from day to day, week to week, month to month. It's a living document that you're thinking about the future on how money is going to come in and out of your business.
And also you improve what you track.
Absolutely.
So
you have to,
as long as you do that. Yeah. So I would agree that it's important to have a minimum level of numeracy, even if you're not keeping the books yourself. Yeah. And I had a bookkeeper for my business, but you have to be able to read those financials.
And because I encourage people, don't spend time on the things that make the most money for your company. Yeah. And bookkeeping isn't one of them. Hire that stuff out. Yeah. Because you're better at other things, and your company will be better for it if you don't put yourself in that situation.
Yeah, I had a great interview with a guy named Peter Keller who runs Fringe Sport when he started in Austin, and he makes fitness equipment. And one of the things he taught me during our episode, which was a few weeks ago, a couple months ago now actually, that he said that the number one problem in your business is you. Right? And then knowing that ultimately, like, all of the impediments to your business doing well come from you. Now, the corollary to that is that obviously all the good things about your business are also you, right? But it's an interesting insight to think about,
absolutely,
like, those weaknesses basically coming from your own weaknesses, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And having that self-awareness.
And recognize that it may be your weakness, but it's not your failing.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah. What is the number one lesson or piece of advice that you would give somebody who's thinking about starting a small business or maybe running their small business right now, if you were to, like, pick the one thing that you would want to share with them? And I know it's tough for you because you have a lot of them, but what is the thing that you would choose?
Well, I think it goes back to thinking things out and doing at least a minimum amount of planning instead of just jumping right in. I mean, I've worked with businesses that don't do a good job of planning, and they succeed. But the majority of businesses I worked with, that if they did the planning up front, it helped them so much more. And so again, there's all kind of, the over the last 30 years, there's been all sorts of ways to talk about business planning and the different ones. There's the canvas. There's the just the straight plan with all the different sections to it. And then there's just whiteboard related on 4 categories, and think about these and then jump in, and those types of things. I think all of them are good because they force you to think about what you're doing before acting.
Let's be specific. So I think that's good advice. The challenge with that advice is that it's kind of unbounded. So, like, in the sense of, like, what is enough planning and what is too much planning? At which point are you getting into just, like, planning and not actually doing anything, right? So where do you draw that line for execution?
So I think you have to, at the minimum, do a market analysis that includes who do you think your customer is and how are you going to get to them? And number 2, a financial analysis that projects a cash flow that shows really a feel of how much money you're going to need to start based on what you currently know about this market, what they're going to pay you, and your costs of operating this business at the front end. So those 2 as a minimum is what people need to work on. And it's so much easier today to identify your market because the in segmenting your market and getting down. There's the 80-20 principle, which is, I think it's Pareto principle.
Pareto efficiency, one of my favorite principles.
And so, that's the 80-20 rule. And in business, it says that 80% of your revenue will come from 20% of the people that buy your product. Okay, so it's interesting in America, and it's been fragmented a little bit more since the craft beer thing came over, but leading up to craft beer, 20% of the people who drank beer or drink beer consume 80% of the volume. Okay.
Well, that's probably indicative of our alcoholism as a nation.
Well, and the market.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, okay, here's 20% of the people that drink beer consume 80% of the volume, which means there's 80% of the people that drink beer only consume 20% of the volume. So who do the companies go after? That 20%. Yeah. And we can identify that 20%. It's probably males in a certain age range, sports oriented, with other interests. So I've always encouraged people to find their beer drinker. Okay, find that 20%, dial it in, do research, look at trade associations, look at there are so many good ways now to be able to dial in on your 20%. So, and then once you do that, do the numbers to estimate what your sales are going to be and your cost side. Because what happens, I'd have many people come to me and go, I need a loan to start my business. Well, how much do you need? Well, I don't know. Okay, well, that's not a very good way to figure this out. And so the cash flow forecast, first the market analysis, who do you think it is? Now let's put some numbers to that. And what we would do is run through that cash flow forecast. Okay, the easy part's calculating expense side, right? The tough part is projecting sales, but let's do our best thing. Let's do research on, okay, what is, other people out there, what are they doing? What do you see? And so let's come up with these numbers. And what will appear, very few businesses go from 0 to 60, immediately, that the market catches on and starts paying them right away. It's usually a ramp up period of time. We have to fill that gap, right? Financially, from the time we start to the time the market pays our bills for us. Because when it comes down to it, our market pays all our bills, right? The money they pay us for our product service.
Well, ideally, there are some companies that just keep raising investor money.
You think about that. Yeah, I wish I had some of those. Would have been in some of those companies where you never turn a profit, but you keep getting money. But that's the thing. And so what would appear then would be this negative number on the cash flow forecast that would say, okay, I'm taking in this much money this month, I'm paying out this month, I have a negative number here, and it accumulates, and then finally the market out a few months out or a few years out catches up, it's paying me. What's that biggest negative number that I accumulated? That's the number I have to have at the beginning to start my business and to grow it. And make those numbers. So back to your original question about the two things, it's market awareness and the financial impact of that market awareness that I think really helps folks.
Awesome. How when is your book coming out? What are you thinking about?
It's one of my many projects.
Okay.
And the great thing about what I do right now is, my friends ask me what I do, and I go, well, a little of this, a little of that. And so as I've thought about, again, 30 years of working with companies, both successes and failures, I've been writing down some of the things that I think are the most important things that businesses can take. Timeless stuff. And that's proven over the years that even with technology changing and the way business changes, there are some core concepts. And so that's what I've started doing a brain dump on, really. Taking all those things out of my head while I can still remember them, and looking at them and analyzing them, going, are these still relevant? And there have been some things that I've said, this just isn't relevant anymore, that this particular concept or this particular thing, and so out it goes. But so my ebook is in development. I'm hoping that it'll come out before too long. It's like anybody that writes anything, it has to be finished to its best extent. It's never going to be perfect, nor do I expect perfection out of it.
That makes sense. Well, David Miller, thank you so much for taking the time to share all this wisdom with our listeners. And I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners have as well. And
thank you.
I really appreciate it, and keep up the good work.
Same to you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Small Business War Stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes.